how did you develop your interest in aviation markets?
Wow, that's a that's a very general question. So the answer it's very clear. Is when I was studying my PhD, I was following a course in industrial organization, and I had to present a paper at that time. And then I found a paper by Jan Brueckner on airline alliances, and I presented that paper at that time, and I found it very inspiring. And that's why I started, like doing my own research, initially on airline alliances, and then on other topics related to aviation. So
actually, this is what I told. Yeah, this is actually what I said to Jan in our last conversation. I told him that the kind of things that he is doing is typically very inspiring for younger researchers. And apparently your case is a very good example for this, right?
It is.
And now you have so many papers with Jan. How many papers do you have with Jan? Do you even can you count them?
No. I mean, I just have 3 papers with
Jan.
3. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have interacted quite a lot, but as co-authors, we have 3 papers together. So.
And one is under review right now in Economics of Transportation. Am I right?
The one. That's the one that is in the special issue. No, I mean, you mean the most recent one? Yeah.
This one is not published, but we have because when I talked to Jan, he said that you have also another one currently under review
right now under review in Economics of Transportation, our journal.
Right. When have you been, and how did you get to the International Transportation Economics Association? How long is it ago that you have been there for the first time at a conference? Do you remember? Can you remember?
I cannot,
but maybe you can.
I think the first time was in 2005 in Finland. So at the moment,
was it the first one? Kuma Nectar it was called at the time, right?
I don't think it was the first one, but it was the first one for me. And it was, at that moment where there were no parallel sessions, we're all together in the same room. So it was like a more familiar kind of workshop, I would say, more than conference. Yeah.
Although the conference, I would say, is still not like of course, there are many like parallel sessions. Always difficult to pick one because they are also good, but it's not. I mean, it's not. There are other conferences that are definitely bigger, so it's still quite a a nice group, and
Absolutely.
it's like a family, big family.
It is. So the good thing after so many years is that when you go there, I mean, of course, you go to a conference, but also go to see your colleagues and friends. So yeah.
Right. Okay. So let's get to the your paper. It's about service quality. So how do you measure service quality in aviation?
Well, that's one of the main things about this paper. I can give you some details about that, but one the initial idea of this paper is that so let me answer first to your question. So service quality in this paper is measured by flight frequency. Although you could think about other quality attributes of flying, I think there is a kind of broad consensus that service quality, the most important attribute for service quality in aviation is flight frequency, because when you have like richer flight frequencies, flights are more convenient for passengers, but because they need to wait less to pick up a flight that kind of fits with their restrictions. So
right, with the needs, right?
With the needs, So that's the way we proxy service quality in this paper.
And, right, and it's basically like a schedule delay. That's what we typically use a term. Schedule
exactly,
delay.
Exactly. That's something we are very used to deal with in transportation. Outside transportation is not so easy to understand. But the idea is that if you have more frequency, then your average schedule delay, that is the time that you will wait until you take a flight, will be smaller. So at the end of the day, either the departure or the arrival will be closer to your ideal departure time or arrival time.
Right. And I think many of the papers that you have been working on, they all incorporate sort of this idea that service quality in terms of frequency is an essential part of what determines airline businesses or airline that's relevant for airline markets.
Absolutely.
So how does...
In fact, there's a concept that we use that is called full price, which takes into account both the fare and the schedule delay. So this is another way to deal with what we also call the generalized cost of transportation.
Right, but you don't. Typically, you will not. If you look at schedule delay, you will not necessarily look at congestion delay together with schedule delay, right? Yeah. It's like something that's just something different.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. So how does what you have been doing for this special issue on service quality compare to what you have done before? Maybe you can, I'm sure you can tell a story about, how you started with this and how this now adds to what we already know from what you have done before. What's the story?
Well, this is like a continuation of a previous paper that we published also with my colleague, with Xavier Fageda, that you know very well, and with Vladimir Pilotkach.
Yeah.
And these papers, these two papers are, the idea of these papers comes from observing a puzzle, which is something that is very nice. It's very nice to start a research from a puzzle. So, and the puzzle here is the following one. In the papers that they are published about the relationship between distance and frequency or service quality, what you typically observe is that frequencies decay with distance. And that makes sense because there is less demand in more distant destinations, right? So that's
I would say actually I would say this is I would say it's potentially the case. In general, why would you say that the demand for long distance markets is smaller than for?
Because in short haul destinations the market is denser. So you would expect that. That when you fly to more distant places, there are less connections, less demand.
So maybe this has to do with there's more traveling within the country rather than between countries.
Exactly.
This could be some gravity model idea.
And you connect also, so you use hub and spoke networks. So
the reason why I said that it's not so obvious to me is, there is one reason that I would, bring up, but I wouldn't say that it's so strong. And this is, if you assume that all else is equal for long distance markets, what you say is the generalized price would be higher because flying longer distances and there is a value of time means that the generalized price would be higher. And that could then structurally lead to lower demand, even though the benefits in the very beginning, they would be equal. But I think the main reason for you to say that the long distance market, the demand is lower, is maybe because there's just a sort of less reason for traveling long distance relative to
exactly, and also because what I told you, because of the use of hub and spoke networks. So you have more indirect flights.
No, I think this is actually very interesting because again, I don't think it's necessary. So. It's not.
That's what you observe in the papers that were published on the effect of distance and frequencies. And the thing is that looking at the data, looking more carefully at the data, what we observed is that this was not always the case. So, and particularly for short haul markets, for shorter distances, what we initially were observing is that frequencies were increasing with distance instead of being decreasing with distance. And we said, wow, and the pattern apparently was very, very clear, very neat. So looking again at the raw data, we observed that frequencies were increasing with distance up to a certain cutoff distance, and then frequencies were decaying with distance.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So we said, well, distance is an important thing here. And what is the main difference between these shorter like markets with respect to the longer ones is basically that. So that's the way we distinguish short haul markets from long haul markets. Is the fact that in short haul markets you have intermodal competition. So and that's the focus of this paper. So we say, okay, maybe by taking into account the fact that these two kind of connections are different, because on short haul markets we have intermodal competition, this could help us to explain why frequencies behave differently with respect to distance when looking at short haul versus long haul markets. So that was the initial idea of this paper and the previous one also with Vladimir.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can tell you more or less what we do in the paper.
Yes, please.
If you want to proceed in this way.
Yes, please. Yes.
So what we do in this paper is that we look at the effect of distance both on frequencies and also on fares in a model where we have both intermodal and intramodal competition. So, of course, on intramodal is always present. So that is competition between carriers that provide air services. But on short haul routes, we have also additionally to this intramodal competition, we have intermodal competition that in our model is competition coming from personal transportation, that is from cars. So, of course, you could think about other kind of intermodal competitions from high-speed rail or buses or, But in our approach, we look at the intermodal competition coming from personal transportation. So so then again we have these two kind of competition, intramodal and intermodal. In our intramodal competition, we distinguish between services operated by network carriers and low-cost carriers. So this is what we call an asymmetric intramodal competition. So that's.
Can I just ask one question? Would you say that competition would increase or reduce frequencies? What would be your hypothesis on this? Or is this because you have a theoretical and empirical part?
Exactly.
But you're making this connection.
That's what I was going to say. So when I will tell you later on if you want, but I can anticipate I can anticipate this result if you want. So when you will, one of the things we find is that when it's more intense in intermodal competition, there are more travelers that make use of these alternatives, and then there is less demand for air travel and frequencies go down. That's what we observe. But
because there is more competition, but there are fewer passengers basically, and therefore because there's always As you anticipate as well, you have many times you have like conflicting effects. And then you need to look at which one dominates. So, and I think that is very interesting in this kind of research is the fact that frequencies and fares are connected. So, that's very, very interesting in this kind of research, because when you have higher frequencies, then as we mentioned before, this is the proxy for quality, for service quality. Right. And then what happens is that this increases the willingness to pay for passengers. Sure.
It's like a shift of the demand curve to the right. So, and then if passengers' willingness to pay is higher, then you could expect that fares should there should be an upward pressure on fares. So that fares should also increase. So that's an interesting connection between fares and frequencies. Coming to results, what we looking first at the theoretical model, because as you said, this is a paper that is both theoretical and empirical.
Which is great,
because this is a collaboration with my colleague and friend Xavier Fageda that you interviewed a couple of times.
Our friend.
Yeah. And you said, how many papers do you have with Jan? And I said 3. But with Xavi, I have 11.
Really?
And we're working in the 12 and the 13 paper together. So.
Wow, that's this is a lot, yeah.
This is a lot. Yeah. So,
so you're almost like a couple.
I think our relationship is better than the one you may find in many couples. Yeah. So yeah, we get along very well together, and he's a very competent empirical guy, and I'm doing mostly theory. So when we have many ideas together. So yeah. So coming to
sounds great. Yeah.
To the theory, we observed that on short-haul routes, as we were observing from the raw data at the beginning, frequencies are increasing with distance because of the presence of intermodal competition. And then up to a certain cutoff, then...
I mean, if with distance, what you are saying is that the intermodal competition gets less, right? Because if you have...
At the very beginning, there is, for very, very short distances, there is no intermodal competition. Then up to a certain point, it appears, and this competition of intermodal competition gets more intense with distance up to a certain point where it's less, right?
I see.
So what we observe is that frequencies are increasing with distance. And the point is what's going to happen with prices, because as I told you before, these two things are related, right? Yeah. And there's a direct effect of distance on prices is that more distant connections are more expensive, more costly or more expensive. Okay. So fares or prices.
But on the other hand, they are also more inconvenient because we dislike traveling long distances. Exactly. So again, there's some ambiguity here.
There's always ambiguity here. Yeah. But then if you look at the connection between frequencies and fares on short-haul routes, it's clear. I mean, longer routes in principle are more costly and prices should go up. And since the frequency also goes up, then service quality goes up and there's a higher willingness to pay. And this reinforces the positive effect of distance on fares. But the point is what happens on long-haul markets. Because since frequency goes down, willingness to pay also goes down, but these routes are more costly to operate normally with distance. So what we observe, and here you have this kind of trade-off, what we observe is that they still, the fares still increase with distance. So basically, bottom line, fares always increase with distance, and frequencies depend. So
but I think what matters is not so much the fares, it's rather the markup, right, that we will be interested in. Because as you say, I mean, there is the cost. So clearly, so I think what would be interesting is like the markup, but that may be difficult for you to understand because you don't have like I don't think you will have like a structural model so that you could basically infer the marginal cost and then calculate the markup, right?
Yes. We don't have that information here.
Right.
And that's the first set of results. And a second set of results is what you were mentioning before, the intensity of the intermodal competition. And that's what I was telling you before, that when intermodal competition the competition is more intense, then there is a kind of business stealing. So passengers move from air transportation to other alternative modes of transportation, and frequencies go down. And there's this connection with fares again. So there is a lower willingness to pay for air connections, and then what we observe is that prices also go down when intermodal competition is more intense.
Something that comes to my mind, but that may be just out of a little bit going beyond what you have been doing. But when I teach my students about competition, what I will tell them typically is that on long distance market, we talk about hub and spoke. Then the competition will typically be larger because if I fly, for instance, from Hong Kong to Berlin is not a real hub, so I have to transfer. And that would mean that I have so many more options than, for instance, from Frankfurt to, I don't know, Berlin or or so. So in general, I would say that long distance markets could be considered more competitive because there's so much more substitute routes, that itineraries in a sense that you could use. And that could, I'm wondering whether that could affect your results.
Yes, but we are looking just sort of direct flights. So we are not considering.
You're okay.
Yeah. So we're considering, in the empirical mode, we're considering routes shorter than 2,000 kilometers. So it's long haul, but within a certain limit, if you want.
Okay.
To put it that way. So actually, this is the first result in our empirical analysis, is that the cutoff is around 600 kilometers. So short haul in our empirical setting would be between 0 and 600 kilometers, and long haul would be between 600 and 2,000. So that's
actually, but this is quite common, I would say, when we talk about intermodal competition. Typically, I think the thresholds that people will mention is around
between
that area,
500
between 500 and 700 maybe kilometers, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Exactly. So that's quite consistent, I think, with the results that others have obtained.
Absolutely. And the last theoretical result is that we look at the different strategies followed by network carriers and low-cost carriers. And this is a very kind of non-surprising result, is that when you see the different behavior between network and low-cost carriers, we look at the what we call the frequency gap and the price gap, which is the difference between the frequencies that they operate and the difference between the prices that they post. What we observe is that both of them are positively related, which makes a lot of sense. So if you observe that the frequency gap increases with distance, the price gap should also increase with distance. Okay. I mean, here this is more an empirical issue. So this is something that we then clear in the empirical part. So, and then going to the empirical part, we confirm the positive relationship of distance and frequency on short haul routes, and then the negative relationship on long haul routes, and the negative and the positive relationship of distance on fares. So this is the first result, and then looking at this frequency gap and fare gap on short haul routes, the empirical results are consistent with our theoretical results, and this is something that is kind of interesting. Is when you observe what happens on short haul markets, what happens is that the frequency gap and the fare gap increase with distance. So here we're saying what can explain this, right?
So where is, again, there is this positive relationship between frequency and price gap and now we are talking about which kind of markets? Short haul
markets.
Short haul, okay.
Short haul markets, yeah. So so the thing is that apparently, and that's what we guess that can explain this result, is that intermodal competition, and more particularly personal transportation, that is taking your car if you wanna go from point A to point B within this limit of 600 kilometers, is actually an alternative for passengers that typically consider either taking their car or a network connection. So because if you look at, like, let's say, passengers with a lower income, with a lower willingness to pay, they probably don't have the possibility to take their car, their personal transportation. So at the end of the day, it seems that there is the more competition between network carriers and personal transportation than between personal transportation and low-cost carriers, for instance. So that's what we think that explains this result. So
Maybe I think I'm not 100% sure I understood. Maybe you can just repeat what was it,
Yeah.
because I think that's quite interesting. So what we see is on short haul markets,
there
is a frequency. There's a gap between and we're talking about, when you talk about gap, we talk about full service and low cost carriers.
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
Okay, and then also, and we look at this in terms of prices. We look at this in terms of frequency, and frequency typically is lower with low cost carriers, or is it lower with?
It's lower with low cost carriers, but the
lower
point is that
with low cost carriers, so they offer lower frequency, lower prices.
Lower frequencies and lower
full service carriers, higher frequency and also higher prices. But when we're looking at a longer, still short haul, but then within the short haul category at longer distances, then what you are saying is that kind of the difference between low cost and full service carriers is sort of increasing, right? Exactly. I think this is, and Absolutely. Now the question is, why is that again?
So the thing here is that what happens on short haul markets is that we have the presence of intermodal competition, which in our setting is mostly competition from personal transportation, right?
Right.
So the thing is
with this like private cars, right?
That's what I think. Private cars, yeah. So what we kind of speculate or think that can explain this result is the fact that network carriers are the ones that are responding more intensively to this competition from private transportation.
Okay, and then you say, and what you are saying is that this competition
increase frequency when there is a stronger competition from cars. They increase their frequency to compete with personal transportation, while this competition affects less low-cost carriers. And this is something that we were not thinking at the beginning. But then looking at the data and also looking at car ownership, which is interesting as well, you say, well, maybe it's not strange, right? That the people that consider the alternatives, or whether taking his or her car to undertake a certain trip, may also consider to take a flight connection. But these two alternatives, of course, personal transportation is more inconvenient, it takes longer. But in terms of a schedule delay, if you consider, you can leave whenever you can leave whenever you want, but you have a pool connection by a low-cost carrier with a couple of flights a week or something like that. Well, it's very convenient, right? So at the end, the margin is more between for these kind of travelers is more between using a personal transportation or let's say full service connection instead of considering a low-cost connection.
So you would say that the gap is if a private car use is more convenient, then would that make the gap higher or lower?
It will. Full service carriers will react more to the presence of personal transportation, and that's why they would increase frequencies more than low-cost carriers. And this is what explains that the gap between low-cost carriers and full-service carriers increases with distance.
Right. Okay. Now I.
I'm sorry.
Get it. Okay,
it's a kind of complex.
No, this is. But I think it's interesting. I think it's very interesting, and I think this is this is really something where a discussion like this can be very helpful in conveying those things rather than insights, rather than in the paper, because I think maybe explaining it in the paper so that people will really be able to follow is kind of a little more, to me, I think is maybe a bigger challenge. So the issue is that intermodal competition, this with the private cars becomes more intense in a sense when you look at the short haul markets. Yes. And then the full service carriers more than the low cost carriers respond to this by offering more convenient service quality or supplies measured by service quality in terms of frequency supply. Right, exactly. I think that's basically the story. Yeah,
absolutely, and this is also empirically confirmed. So we observe, we can confirm this empirically, looking at services provided network carriers as compared to low-cost carriers. And
yeah, that's quite rich, actually. That's really rich because you have all these different scenarios, basically. Full-service low-cost carrier, short-haul, long distance. But then also within short-haul, you have like this very short-haul or a little bit less short haul in a sense, and there are all these different effects. So I think this is makes it it's very colorful result in a sense, and difficult to anticipate. And I understand why you're saying that there is like a puzzle that you try to solve.
Yeah. So this is basically.
So what are the lessons? What are did you come up with some sort of? I think we're always interested in what are managerial, what are policy lessons, perhaps, or are any is there would you say that we need more competition in short haul relative to long haul markets, and or that there's a tendency to undersupply service quality in short haul or long haul markets?
In this paper, we don't really have a welfare analysis, so we cannot really derive many policy implications with that.
But I think there could be some managerial lessons for, I would say, low cost and full service carriers, right? Because they sort of because they compete with each other. The competition between low cost and full service carriers is typically quite intense, and of course, as you said, frequency matters. And I think for those low cost or full service carriers to understand how their counterparts, their rivals, respond to basically their service.
Probably a managerial implication you could derive from that is that carriers should probably also consider the competition coming from personal transportation, especially full service carriers should also take this into account, because there's a growing literature about the intermodal competition coming from high speed rail, but there's not so much done about personal transportation. And that's, if you think about the US market, of course, this is, personal transportation is very important, right?
But if you think about China, then of course, high speed rail is, is very, very important. Yeah. And private cars are becoming more and more important as well. I mean, there's so
I guess that's anyway one managerial implication. That.
Interesting. Yeah. Any other results that we forgot to mention, or that we still need to? That are worth
I don't know.
Highlighting.
I didn't mention that our data is European data, in the paper, and that's kind of interesting because there's not so much done with European data on aviation in general. So. That's something I didn't mention. And there's another thing that I didn't mention. There is an additional empirical result that is not really related to the theoretical model, which looks at intertemporal price discrimination. Yeah. So looking at long haul again and short haul markets. And what we find here, looking at tickets sold at different moments before the
but the ticket prices are typically for European markets a little more difficult to get. So you have transacted prices, or you have like stated prices.
These are posted prices.
Posted prices, right?
Yeah, by RDC Aviation.
Right.
And this is something that we thought that it was interesting at the very end of the paper, just to see if there were differences between short-haul markets and long-haul markets, and building some measures of intertemporal price discrimination or price dispersion, I would say, more than dispersion. What we are saying is
please go ahead.
No, it's simply that there is less intertemporal price discrimination on short-haul markets.
Because they are more competitive.
Because there is more competition,
Right. Okay. And I was just wondering about when I was looking, I saw, of course, I looked up the title of your paper, And when I was thinking about the relationship between distance and frequency, then I was thinking that it seems like there also is a natural relationship in the sense that if you have a given fleet, and let's say that you only serve long-haul markets, then just because your fleet is limited, you cannot offer such a high frequency. Whereas if you have, let's say with one aircraft, if you fly short distance, you can fly in one day many times back and forth. But if you fly long distance, only once. So there is, I think, also some element here that relates distance to frequency supply. That I think in the very beginning you mentioned that in long distance markets there were sort of more frequencies, right? I think, but that was in the short haul, relatively long short haul flights, right? So I think this is actually also not trivial, because if we look at this effect, if you fly longer distances, it's just more difficult with a given fleet to offer higher frequencies, right? Because of the basically the capacity constraint.
It's a matter of capacity constraint. Yeah. Right.
There is one other thing that I thought is kind of interesting, and I'm wondering whether you had some thoughts on this, because clearly when we like doing some empirical work, I think indigeneity is always like something to be kind of think about, and I do believe that frequency choices is not very short term. It's something that you plan ahead, right? And the same is true for route choices. So I would say maybe that's just some simultaneous. There were some simultaneous decisions made by when it comes to frequencies and distances in a sense. So I'm just I have no. I was just, that was just something that occurred to me, and I was wondering whether you
because airlines commit to provide like flight connections with quite in advance, right? So
yes.
So whatever.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at slots, for instance, which are very common in Europe, then you can say itineraries are not so. Frequencies are more easily changed, whereas itineraries maybe not that much, especially if you look at maybe more for full service carriers than less for full service than for low cost carriers. That could also be something interesting, because I would say slots are more relevant, which put some constraints on network design or network changes, are more relevant for full service carriers compared to low cost carriers, and that could have some effect on the results. So, but I'm this is just going beyond, of course. What
maybe we can do a paper together.
That would be, I think, there's okay. So coming up with some interest with problems is not a big problem. There's so much work to do, I would say. But I think for us, finding problems is not a problem. Okay. But for young PhD students, finding interesting problems to look at, definitely I feel is a bigger challenge. So if some PhD students listening to us, I think that may be something you wanna look at. So we basically said, okay, we're looking at frequency supply and network design, and then a difference between low cost and full service carriers. And then this might matter because full service carriers are more making more substantial use of airports which are slot constrained, and then we know that slots are a big asset and put some constraints on what you want to do with your network. Whereas low-cost carriers are, I think, quite famous for being quite aggressive in changing their networks. At least for Ryanair, I think that is true. So that could be an effect, and that may be worthwhile investigating. So
but all these ideas comes from your experience and your knowledge of the industry, right? So
right.
This is why for them is is obviously harder. And there are many particularities from transportation and from air transportation. So when you move from the IO literature to the transportation literature, there are some things that remain valid, if you want, but there are others that don't. Like, for instance, all this discussion about frequency in like standard IO models, you don't have frequencies, right? So you
have service quality. I mean, if you look at it from the point of view of service quality, and this is then the transfer in a sense is not that necessarily spectacular.
But you don't have schedule delay, so it's another way to measure quality.
It's a more specific, right? I mean, it puts some structure to it that you may want to exploit in your analysis, right? I think that's
exactly.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's where I was in the motivation of my papers, that I always try to make this point, to make the connection with the IO literature exactly in the lines that you are mentioning right now. So
wonderful. Great. Thank you, Rick.
Yeah. Thank you, Achim. My pleasure.